Greetings fellow gorehounds and welcome back to another Blood Splattered vlog. So the next movie up in my 2016 catch-up is I Am Not a Serial Killer, a movie currently available on Netflix streaming. Now, I heard a lot of really good things about this movie when it first hit Netflix streaming, but I honestly didn't know thing one about what actually happens in the movie. Which turned out to be a really good thing, because this movie is a really solid film with a lot of surprising twists and turns. Like, it starts off as one kind of movie, but then quickly shifts into another kind of movie, and then doesn't go anywhere where I thought it was gonna go. Which was truly a breath of fresh air. I'm not used to watching a movie that surprised me as often as this one did. But without getting into any of those twists and turns, this movie is essentially a weird combination of Dexter and Nancy Drew. And by that I mean it's about a teenager who's been clinically diagnosed with sociopathy and as a result is obsessed with serial killers. He's not only constantly researching them, he's also writing a ton of school papers about them, and he's deathly afraid that it's the path that he might fall into. Essentially, he's worried he might become a serial killer. But when a series of murders strike his town and he starts to notice a pattern with each of them, he starts to realize that his town has its very own serial killer. And at first, he's fascinated by this, so he starts looking into it. He starts searching. He tries to solve the mystery of who this killer is. Hence, like I said, Nancy Drew meets Dexter. But that's really only scratching the surface of what this movie actually does, and I'll get more into that when we get to the spoilers. But yeah, I really ended up liking this main character despite the fact that he has like no emotional connection to anybody, which is quite a feat. If you can make a movie about a character who lacks any emotional connection to anybody and still make me empathize with him, that is masterful filmmaking right there. Because human connections are part of what make us human, and when that's completely severed, it's hard to relate. Yet I still found myself relating on some small level to this character. And not just because when I was in high school, I was also obsessed with all these serial killers. More than once, I ended up in the principal's office getting a talking to about what was normal, which also happens in this movie. But some of the things I really like about this movie, without getting too much into the plot, is I actually really like the way it's shot. Because the director of this movie made a conscious decision to shoot this movie on 16mm, which gave the movie this beautiful 70s film grain look, even though it was set in the modern day. And I know this because they use modern day cell phones and shit. But what I liked about the look is that it perfectly matched what the documentary footage of the 70s would have looked like, so it kind of looked like almost a documentary of a serial killer from the 70s. But it's shot like a regular movie, don't get me wrong, it's not at all like a found footage pseudo-documentary kind of film. I'm more just talking about like the film quality, like the texture of the grain. And you can tell the 70s was definitely what was inspiring this movie, not only because, you know, all the 70s serial killers are mentioned, but also because the title sequence of this movie uses a lot of 70s movie-style fonts. And the soundtrack sounds like it could have been ripped straight from The Exorcist at times. But even that isn't getting into my favorite part of this movie, which is hands down the fact that Christopher Lloyd is in this fucking movie. Yeah, you heard me right, Doc Brown is in this horror movie. And I'm not even talking like a cameo like in Piranha 3D, where they obviously only had him for one day, so he's only ever in the one location in the movie. He is part of the main cast of this movie, basically playing like the surrogate grandpa for the main character. And he does a fantastic job! I didn't realize how much I missed seeing him in movies until I'm sitting there watching this movie and he shows up on screen and I'm like, holy shit, it's Christopher Lloyd! Just, man, I don't even know what more to say in the non-spoiler section because there's so much about this movie that is so easily spoiled. So I'll just say, if you want a truly unique horror movie that is really fucking good, has a nice 70s style, and stars Christopher Lloyd, then look no further than I Am Not a Serial Killer. It's currently on Netflix streaming in North America, and it is really fucking good. And with that all said, let us move on to the spoilers. Okay, where to start with this fucking movie? So as I established in the non-spoiler section, this is about a sociopathic teenager who's obsessed with serial killers and starts hunting down a real serial killer, and he has like a set of rules that he follows to make sure that he doesn't kill anybody. Which that alone could have been a fantastic movie in its own right. But at about the 20-minute mark, this movie makes a hard left turn into just complete what the fucksville. Because he starts tracking down this local bum who he's convinced might be the serial killer, and he follows him as the bum starts to follow Christopher Lloyd. Christopher Lloyd briefly befriends him, they end up deciding to go out and go ice fishing, so the teenager follows them to go ice fishing. But when he gets out there, the bum pulls a knife and tries to kill Christopher Lloyd, and that's when Christopher Lloyd turns around, his arm outstretches into this weird, like, vine-like configuration and stabs right through the bum's heart. Christopher Lloyd roars, he starts ripping out the guy's organs and then replacing his own organs with the guy's organs. Yeah, you heard me right, he starts replacing his organs with the bomb's organs. I'm gonna repeat that one more time.
He starts replacing his organs with the bomb's organs.
Like, I can't make this shit up. At about 20 minutes in, this turns into a monster movie with Christopher Lloyd as the monster. And at that point, this becomes a cat and mouse game between the teenager and Christopher Lloyd. Basically, if the first half of this movie was Nancy Drew meets Dexter, then the second half of this movie is way more like a fucked up sociopathic version of Fright Night. And I fucking love Fright Night. He starts stalking Christopher Lloyd and like helping him with housework and like looking into his murders just to see what he's doing and why. He starts looking up folklore to try to figure out what the monster is, but he gets no clear answers. While Christopher Lloyd, it turns out, is married to a wife and in a loving marriage, and it's very obvious that his organs are constantly failing. But he wants to stay alive for his wife, so he keeps replacing his organs with other people's organs, which of course, humans can't do, but he can because he's some sort of creature. But his wife is not, so what the fuck is going on? And all the while this is going on, the teenager starts behaving erratically. He starts, stalking Christopher Lloyd. He starts showing up in weird locations. He's always at the crime scenes. So he has to deal with his mom, his principal, and his therapist thinking that he's crazy and that he's about to jump off the deep end. So eventually, after one murder too many, he leaves a note on Christopher Lloyd's car letting him know that someone knows who he is. And this causes Christopher Lloyd to lock himself in his house and not go out and murder people, but meanwhile, his organs are like 100% failing. In particular, his heart is failing. So it's like a countdown. He's got to find a heart to replace his so that he can continue to live and love his wife and be with her until she dies, while the teenager is constantly on his trail and wants him to know he's on his trail so that he won't kill anybody. Which creates this very interesting dynamic. You have a movie where the main character is a sociopath and doesn't seem to have any true human connections, while the serial killing monster that he's chasing has an actual human connection, more of a human connection than he does. The monster is doing this all out of love, while the main character is doing this all out of pure morbid fascination. But eventually this cat and mouse game ends up culminating in a phone call in which the teenager ends up going out to a payphone and calling Christopher Lloyd and taunting the shit out of him because he just had a really shitty day and he was extremely pissed off. And the reason he's pissed off is actually one of the first signs of human connection in the main character we see in the movie. Because it turns out it was Christmas that night, and earlier that day he got a present from his estranged father that was completely fucked up. And by fucked up, I mean he bought him an MP3 player that was supposed to be filled with all the songs they used to listen to when he was a kid so that he can remember all the good times with his dad, which, if the main character truly didn't care about anybody, there'd be no reason why the connection with his dad not being connected again would hurt him. Because secretly, he does have some human connections, and that's kind of his arc of the movie. But what he doesn't take into account is that he's calling Christopher Lloyd's cell phone, and Christopher Lloyd figures out that the guy's on a payphone, so he gets in his car and drives out to the local payphone. And this creates a chase scene that leads to him running to his best friend's house. But then he gets into a fight with his best friend because he reveals to his best friend that he only really hangs out with him because that makes him seem normal. So his friend kicks him out of the house, but then he stumbles upon Christopher Lloyd killing the friend's dad. And it's at this point the main character completely snaps. Obviously, killing his friend's dad actually did mean something to him. So he sneaks into Christopher Lloyd's house, puts a bag over his wife's head, and hits her over the fucking head with a fucking phone. And even though this is a spoiler section, this leads into a final act that I am not gonna spoil, you have to see for yourself. But man, this is a really awesome, really fantastic, really unique horror movie. It's got a great protagonist who's really well acted, it's got an amazing villain, it's got a great retro style look, and despite being a movie about a sociopath, you will find yourself emotionally invested in what's happening. Not only to the teenager, but also to Christopher Lloyd. Now, if I were to say anything negative about the movie, it is really slow at times. So if you are at all sleepy, I highly recommend watching something a little more action-packed. But if you're in the right mindset, then this movie is definitely worth a watch. Every second is totally worth it. Anyway, my fellow gorehounds, I've officially run out of things to say about this movie, so as per usual, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch y'all later.